everybody hear me okay? All right. So again, today, and you're aware of this already, but today is one of 4 workshops that have been taking place through the state. And today is the 3rd one, and that's me. That we had Annie Evans, was from Charlottesville yesterday, Jim Brown last week in Fairfax County, and in October, Ellen Stick from Roanoke City is going to present to folks in that area of Virginia. So we work together to sort of present the same message throughout Virginia. So for the first few slides, I want to take a little bit of time and reinforce some of the most important things that Kristania talked about earlier in the presentation. And one of those is here. So this is here's what, now what. So I want you to notice, because she mentioned this, is that the expanded use of the authentic performance assessments constitutes a new direction for Virginia. All right, and that's what she has spoken about. But I want you to pay attention to the bold words, because the bold words need to continue to ring true to you. This is still relatively new. There is no expectation that the performance assessments will be perfectly executed immediately. But the State Department is looking at this as an opportunity to engage in innovation. And as one of my former leaders used to say, as we were engaging in this innovation, Lynn, innovation is messy. And so I say that to you, innovation is messy. It takes a while to get your head around some of these things. But the Virginia Department of Education has said to us, you have this time. Take your time, get your head around it, and then, move forward and see how you do. But take your time. So to get started here, I really want to find out, kind of get an idea of who is in the room. So I'm going to have you stand up. This is actually a Kagan structure. Anybody use Kagan strategies in their division? All right, so this is a Kagan structure. So the first thing I'd like to ask you to do is, if you are a classroom teacher or a resource teacher, please stand up. All right, look around the room. Awesome. All right, thank you. Have a seat. Now, if you are an administrator, an educational leader, director, or superintendent, please stand up. Okay, thank you. Thank you for being here too. If you are a specialist, a coordinator, or a supervisor of social studies, please stand up. And some of us stand up more than once. Yes. Great. Thank you. If you have experience using performance-based assessments, stand up, please. Awesome. Okay. Thank you. And the last one, if you have created performance-based assessments, please stand up. All right. Thank you. So that's given us an opportunity really to see who's in the room. But you notice that there are more teachers in this room than other occupations. All right. We're all here to support. But the exciting thing about this is that this isn't necessarily top down. This is what I consider what's been happening in Chesterfield and many other counties around Virginia, a grassroots sort of movement. What does this look like? What are performance-based assessments? And so we're going to start with teachers to make sure our teachers truly understand performance-based assessments, because you all are the ones that are the boots on the ground, and you're going to be implementing this work in your classroom. So welcome to everybody here today. So this leads us to our learning targets. And when we talk about performance-based assessments, and you hear performance-based assessments, another part of language you're going to hear along with PBAs are going to be learning targets. How many of you are familiar just with the language of the word learning targets? Raise your hand. You just get an idea. Okay. So our learning targets for this session, for this part, is hopefully by the end you're going to gain an awareness of performance-based assessment, or PBA, within a balanced assessment approach, which Kristonia talked about. You're also going to explore something called the Virginia Quality Criterion Tool to understand the elements of a high-quality PBA. And the last thing is you're going to recognize the role of the PBA used as a local alternative assessment. So these are the 3 goals that we have for this session, hour. So, boy, have we been on a journey. So, if you think back to 2001, when No Child Left Behind came into play, and basically we were told that there was going to be a whole new accountability system put into play. We know this. I'm sort of rehashing the story. But I want to back up to tell you a little bit about this journey because I want to mention my part of this journey. Because I was in the classroom before the standards of learning assessments came into play. So I remember what that feels like or felt like. When the standards of learning assessments tied to accountability came into play, I was a teacher in a 7th grade classroom. And we were invited to a faculty meeting one day, and at the faculty meeting, the superintendent of the school division where I was teaching came in to visit us. And part of what he said at that time, so what he mentioned at that time was, and I'm going to go ahead and just say that this was verbatim, because it was. The sentence that came out of the mouth of the superintendent, if your students don't pass this test, you're going to lose your job. All right, so that was the reaction in faculty meeting, by the way. So at that point, a switch went off in my head, and in the heads of, I think, of all the teachers in there, that even though I felt that I had been a successful teacher up to that point, students were doing well. I enjoyed my class, little behavior issues. I mean, I felt really good about my career. But somehow at that point, I sort of started to think that maybe I wasn't such a good teacher after all, and I needed to change what I was doing. So as you know the old story, because it's part of this journey, part of the journey was that we began to change our instruction to support the assessment, which is basically teaching to a test. So now here I am as a curriculum specialist for secondary social studies, and I am in a role now, and so excited to be in this role while we are ushering out the old and bringing back in what really we used to do, okay? And sort of giving it maybe a new face. Now, I guarantee there's people in this room right now who are teachers who are young, and when you went to school, you had SOL assessment. And then you became a teacher, and you were teaching the way you were taught, because that's sort of what we do. So this is going to be a big shift, not just for the veterans, but also for the young people. We're all in the same boat, all right? So this is sort of part of our journey. So as we think about our assessment practices, our current assessment practices, the piece that we're shifting to, and we remember sort of the journey that we were on, we're going to start looking at assessments through a new lens, all right, which is going to lead to a different mindset when it comes to assessment and instruction. So I want you to take a look at this slide for just a minute. I'm going to stop talking briefly. This is a slide about balanced assessment. So I want you to take a second. I want you to look at it and say to yourself, what do I notice? So take a second to do that. So I wonder if some of the things that you notice on this chart about balanced assessment is that when we talk about balanced assessment, it still includes the stuff that we know about really well, like the traditional assessment. Did you notice that? And then it blends into the performance-based, and then the authentic assessment, all right? So underneath, as we talk about balanced assessment, it is okay to still give multiple choice assessments. It's okay to still give a lecture from time to time. That's okay. Because you know Bloom's taxonomy has like 6 parts, right? And each part has a reason, has a purpose. So when we think about a balanced assessment approach, we are not throwing out the old to bring in the new. Now, for me, that gives me some comfort to know that the new and shiny thing that is here, sometimes when something new and shiny comes, we get rid of everything we've known to have to go to the new and shiny. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. So that's not the case. So when we think about balance, we want to think about our traditional assessment, because this fits into the phrase of what students know and are able to do. And that's when we work into that performance-based type of assessment. Here's another visual for you to think about balanced assessment. So under the section that talks about what students know, it's the essential knowledge, it's the basic facts, these are the concepts. You're still going to need to teach this information. But what they can do, you're going to think about taking this up to the essential understandings, the essential skills, real-world situations. What can students do with this? I also like to think about this chart, and I imagine that before we ushered in this balanced approach, I'm picturing this scale, obviously not balanced. Okay? So here are the example types of assessments that we mentioned a few minutes ago. So what students know fits into that multiple choice. True, false, fill in the blank. But what they can do, that's where we are in our performance-based assessments. To take a look at this, this is the most recent and most up-to-date definition from the Virginia Department of Education about performance-based assessments. So the words that are accentuated in this definition: perform a task, create a product, scored using a rubric, real-life situation. All of those terms, all of those words in this whole definition encompass performance-based assessment. So we're getting ready to get to the part of today, of this hour, where we have been talking a lot about, you know, what it is that you need to know to get your background, performance-based assessment, authentic. We've been spending that time. So this is where we're getting ready to do a little shift, because now that you know this, what can you do with it? All right? So in a few minutes, we're going to look at the quality criterion tool. We're going to look at a performance-based assessment. We're not going to create one today, because it's important first that you know what a quality PBA looks like. So here's the list that we get started. So a characteristic for a high-quality performance-based assessment: clear connections to the rigorous standards. Because remember, the standards are not going away, but the traditional assessment tied to accreditation of those standards, that's what's being replaced. So we want to make sure that your PBA connects to your standards. That's imperative. That your high-quality performance-based assessment is engaging. It's authentic. It has some type of real-world connection. That it's open-ended. There's multiple right answers. To me, this line by itself is remarkable, because what this says is differentiation. This is not a one-size-fits-all assessment anymore. Because, you know, NCLB has been ushered out, because, again, a big piece of that was that every child basically took the same type of assessment, and that just wasn't working. And it wasn't appropriate for all learners. So in a PBA, students have more ability to make some choice, In a high-quality PBA is going to have a final product. There will be choice, teacher choice, and student choice, both. There is a clear task and a clear prompt. These are some of the qualities. And there's a criteria for measurement, aka the rubric. So here's where our shifting instruction is coming in from the VBA lead. As Kristania mentioned, the 2015 standards completely lend themselves to PBA because of that skills progression chart. Now we're going to teach content through the skills in Standard 1, K-12, in social studies in Virginia. Now I just want to mention something quickly about this chart. Because when I was first introduced to this chart, and I looked at it and thought through it and read through the superintendent's memo several times, an overwhelming feeling came to me was how remarkable this is. Because what I could see with this skills progression chart is that it's really the first time that I could ever see that there was a true visual connection of K-12 social studies. I mean, this tells the story. And last week in Chesterfield, we had a 2-day workshop with 100 K-12 history teachers. And they sat at tables, they built vertical relationships. There were elementary, middle, and high school teachers at each table. And they had a discussion about this chart. What does this mean? What does it mean? What does this mean to an elementary teacher, to a middle and a high school teacher? And they had this conversation about the big picture here. And they all could clearly see that we assume that we all support each other. But this puts it in a clear visual of how important all teachers, K-12, are to educating our students. It brings us all together. And to me, that's remarkable. So just for a brief minute or two, I want you to think about, when you look at these skills, how can these skills be leveraged within our instruction to help students deepen understanding of social studies content and solidify the profile of a graduate? So take a second or two and talk about that at your table. So, did you all find that remarkable, your discussion about this and what it can mean? Any sort of some aha moments coming along from these skills? This is very exciting. So keep in mind what your discussions were about, because now we're going to sort of shift a little bit, keeping in mind the idea about K-12 skills, but we're going to move into sort of the next piece of this, which is how do we determine if a performance-based assessment is high quality? Now, I gave you a list of things to think about, but we need to get into a little bit more depth so that we fully, get more of an understanding of that. So on your table, I want you to locate this document, the Virginia Quality Criterion Tool for PBA. So what I'm going to ask you to do, and again, I'm going to give you actually some time to really think about this and read it. So what I'm going to ask you to do, now that you have this in your hand, is that you need time to get your head around it for a few minutes in a quiet way. All right, so we need time to read and to think. So as you explore this tool, and there's 10 things to look at, so as you explore this tool quietly, what you need to be doing is thinking about, again, what do you notice? And based on what you notice, what questions do you have? Now, there's a couple of places that you can jot this down. Actually, you can write right on this document. And if you notice something that really stands out to you, make a note on the document, or you can make a note on a sticky note that's close by. Now, it's very important that you take that time to write down some of your thoughts, because after about 8 minutes or so, someone at your table is going to become the scribe. So everybody look around, see who that's going to be. Somebody is going to become the scribe. And we are going to provide another copy of this document. It's going to be a different color. And you're going to have table talk, and you're going to share with the scribe some of the things that you've noticed about this document. and some of the questions that you still have about this document. The scribe will then, once they finish taking notes, that's what's going to be left with Christania to go through and review later. Remember how she said earlier that teachers are going to get their eyes on this today and get to make some suggestions about things that they wonder about? That's going to be the time. But we don't want to start that too early. All right? I know sometimes we're in a group and we're reading something. One group finishes before another and everybody starts talking, and it's frustrating because you're still trying to concentrate. So I'm going to actually time this. So I'm going to start with about 8 minutes of complete silence. You're reading, you're thinking, you're concentrating, and writing down things you notice. And then I'll tell you what we're going to do after that. Are there any questions? All right, 8 minutes on your mark, get set, go. Okay, I feel fairly safe that we probably have like 30 seconds left, so I'm going to go ahead and call time because we need to move into this next piece. So I want you to raise your hand if you are the scribe at your table. Raise your hand if you are the scribe at your table. Now, if you're a scribe, it doesn't mean you have to share out, but let me see your hands. All right, everybody give a round of applause to the scribe. Okay. Now, if you are the scribe, got it. Is there any table that does not have this document, the green document? So if you are the scribe, you are going to listen and write, but you can also contribute. We just spent roughly 8 minutes looking through the Virginia Quality Criterion tool, and I asked you, what did you notice? And then maybe questions that you might have. So for this next 5 minutes, you're going to share at your table some things that you noticed, some questions that you had, and the scribe is going to write those things down so that we can have this as documentation to help continue to make sure this is a quality criterion tool based on teacher feedback. All right, so share at your table, scribes, get this information down. On your mark, get set, go. 5 minutes. Okay. If you could bring your reflection sort of to a close, even though I know we could probably do this for maybe 10 or 15 more minutes. Okay. You'll take a look at the screen in the front. All right, so what we want to do is we want to take just a second to take a closer look. Chances are, when you first began to engage with this Virginia Quality Criterion tool, you probably just jumped right in, which is what we mostly do. We just look at the tool. Sometimes we forget to look at the paragraph above, which has some very important information. So I'm going to read it, and I'm going to point out some very important parts, and maybe if you have this, you could highlight it. So this document, the Virginia Quality Criterion Tool for PBAs, this is a guide. It's a guide to help develop performance-based assessments, and it does this by establishing a common language. So whether you are in Newport News, Virginia, or Galax County, your PBAs are going to follow the criteria that's here. And this helps to set up for equity in classrooms around Virginia because we all have this quality criterion tool. So it establishes a common language and important criteria for these PBAs. This document is not a how-to guide. It doesn't teach you how to create a PBA. There will be additional templates that will be available down the road because remember, we've talked about how this is a journey, all right? And that part of the journey is still to come, all right? So this PBA assessment tool is a guide to help develop these PBAs, and we hope to utilize this tool across grades and content areas, not just social studies, but across all content areas. It's also a guide to help in this shift in instructional practices with teachers. Because remember the story I said about how my instructional practices changed because I thought I had to pass this test? And we all did that. At some point in time, we taught to the test. This tool will help us move away from that. All right, that's one of its purposes. Okay? And it's also going to help engage students in meaningful work. And you know what? All of this that we're doing, all of this that we're working on is going to help to get our students ready for the workforce or for college, for the real world. Okay? The profile of a graduate, let's get them ready. And this tool is going to help us to do that. All right? So we've had this opportunity once again to learn information. We've had a little bit of practice, which is what you just did a few minutes ago. You dove into the tool. Now we're going to let you apply some of this knowledge. On your table, there is a sample lesson plan. I want you to find it. It says U.S. History 1, Performance Assessment. Where to go, New England, the Mid-Atlantic, or the South? Please find that lesson plan. Now, this lesson plan, this performance-based assessment was created by Ruth Cookson and Stephen Day for the Virginia Council on Economic Education. And this performance-based assessment is actually on the website for VCEE. So, what we're going to get you to do to sort of apply some of what you've learned is at your table, we're going to get you to read through this lesson, I keep saying lesson plan, this performance-based assessment. You're going to read through it. You're going to familiarize yourself with the performance-based assessment. Now, I want you to notice something on your table. You have a tent. You have a table tent on your table. Do you see it? All right. You see the number on that. The number on that tent refers to the number on the quality criterion tool. So you know how there's 10 criteria? Your table, in just a minute, is going to focus on the number that's on your table. So raise your hand if you have a 1. I'm not going to go through. All right. So table 1. When your table finishes reading through this performance-based assessment, you are going to compare that PBA to the first criteria on that tool. That's going to be your job. If you're a 2, you're going to compare the second criteria to this PBA. Does it match? Does it still need some tweaking? Is it in good shape, in your opinion so far? And 3 through 10 tables, you're going to do the same thing. So it's almost like a jigsaw. So you're not responsible for comparing it to all of the criteria, but just that one that's on your table tent. Now, ideally, once this piece is done, I'm actually going to ask tables to share out. What did you notice? Did this lesson plan match with your criteria that you were assigned? And if it did, tell us how. If it didn't, what suggestions, where do you think it did not match up? All right, any questions? On your mark, get set, go. Yes, you may write on these. So ladies and gentlemen, this is what I just found out. I'm running out of time. Okay? All right? So, ideally, I wanted to try to have us sort of share out some of the things that you found, but I'm just going to ask some questions, first of all, and maybe you can raise your hand to see. So, you were looking through this PBA created by the VCEE, and you were comparing it to the quality criterion tool. All right? So, table 1. Just by show of hands, do you feel that this PBA connected and really did a nice job, or did it need some work for, or let me just raise your hand if you think it connected well to criteria 1, the standards. Was it connected to standards? Okay, good. So table 2, did you feel that this sort of connected to second criteria. Cognitive demand. Raise your hand if you feel like it had cognitive demand. All right, thumbs up. So table 3, was there an authentic piece to this PBA? Was there authenticity? Let me see. Okay. So criteria 4, were there opportunities for students to engage in constructive conversations? Okay, we got some thumbs up there. And the success criteria, did the success criteria provide a variety of assessment opportunities? Table 5, do we get thumbs up? Okay. Number 6, student directions and prompts. Were the prompts, was it clear? Was it developmentally appropriate? We had some thumbs up for 6. All right, table 7, accessibility. Thumbs up for accessibility? Oh, ish. Okay, so it may need to be observed for accessibility to make it match a little better. Okay. Number 8, feasibility. Is the duration and expectation of the task realistic? Was it developmentally appropriate for US 1? No. All right, so it didn't necessarily fit A, so we need to go back and look at the feasibility. All right, good. Number 9, instruction. Was there instruction that built up to the PBA? Did they have skills and knowledge building up? So we think maybe, but maybe that needs a little tweaking to make it a little better. And the last one, teacher materials. Is the duration and expectation of the task realistic? Table 10. Thumbs up? Okay. So the activity that you just did, okay, again, I keep mentioning sort of best practices. You learned about the information. You had an opportunity to practice this. So one idea that you could consider, because I know there's many of you who are using performance-based assessments right now, if you were to take this tool back to your county and sort of take this tool and compare it to the PBAs that you've already been doing and see how you might need to tweak it to make it fit this criteria. This activity that we did today, you could do in a PLC with your grade level or your content area. This is easily transferable, and to have these discussions within your PLC, all right? And this is part of our journey. We didn't learn how to write PBAs today, but we did learn about the quality criteria that PBAs need to have to make them really accessible, equal to students all through Virginia, so that when we have a bank of assessments one day to use for everybody in the state of Virginia, these assessments are going to follow this quality criteria tool and support students throughout Virginia, all students, okay? You all did a really nice job with that activity, by the way. Great engagement. Yeah, give yourselves a round of applause. You really worked hard on that. All right, this is what I love. Some teachers would say, you know, can you just take the quality criteria and make it a no-fluff version? I mean, put it in student language. And you will have this in your PowerPoint. You know, so if students are thinking about what is an intended learning outcome, the kids say, you know what, just make sure it matters. This is sort of student language, cognitive demand. Make me think, get me to show what I know, how I know it, and what I can do with it. If you use this and you kind of take a look at this, this sort of takes those 10 criteria and puts it into user-friendly language. So you can sort of go back and forth that this is really student language to understand this, each of the criteria here. All right? And this was used with permission. Dr. Chris Garys from William & Mary sort of created this to go along with the tool that he had a great deal of influence on creating. Okay, but we think you're going to really like this tool. It's in your PowerPoint. So if we are asked to stretch our thinking about assessment, we also need to think and stretch our instruction. So if we're going to teach to a test, we're going to be teaching to a new type of test, not a multiple choice tied to accreditation test. So what in our classroom is going to need to change up or shift to be able to meet this type of assessment? And so then what should social studies instruction look like to prepare our students to be successful? In the next session this afternoon, you're going to be in and see some examples of how performance-based assessment can look in a classroom. We're going to have teachers here modeling some lessons for you. So I know that you're going to get a lot out of that piece. So again, I'll remind you to go back to your final thoughts, the 3, 2, 1, the things that you're going to take away with you today, and make sure that you fill this out before you leave. And stay in touch. You have our emails if you would like to reach out. And thank you so much, and I hope that you learned a little bit. Take it with you. Here today, it's very important. But as we talk about shifting to performance-based assessments, we need to keep in mind that what we are talking about in this journey is to be ready for this shift when it officially happens. Because what we're talking about hasn't actually been, I guess, approved or officially passed in policy by the School Board of Virginia. And so I want to make that clarification. We are preparing to move forward with this. But as I sort of like to think about, we're sort of creating this plane while we're still flying it. We're building it, and which is really exciting because we get an opportunity for input, and people are still thinking about what's best. So what I wanted to mention that. So when you leave here today, don't necessarily say this is official, because until the school board for the state of Virginia, signs off to say it is official, then we're still working in the knowledge that what we have is where we are right now, even though we're preparing for what is coming. All right, so I wanted to make that clarification. Kristania, is that good?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay.